Will Goldstein here, thekingscourt.com. Again, now there's always a chance to subscribe here if you've been watching these videos down there in the corner down there. And again, I'm a musician. I just released another album, my 10th album, called The King's Highway. And it's CD Baby is my distributor, so you can always check that music out. I'm already working on my 11th one. Keep going. So anyway, so as far as this goes, we're doing C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. The title of this particular video is Time and Beyond Time. Just a word about this if you've been watching these videos. Look, this book is really written for non-Christians. It's really written for people who are skeptical and trying to get an idea of why people are Christians. And it's a defense, it's apologetic, it's a defense of Christianity to people who are perhaps interested in the idea of Christianity and the concepts relative to that. So he starts off by this, in this video, Time and Beyond Time, by bringing up the idea of prayer. And he says the subject of prayer is difficult for some people, and the reason why is they think, well, I can believe in a God, all right, but I cannot believe in the idea that there's hundreds of millions of people all over the world and they're all addressing him at the same moment of time. In other words, how can he handle that? So in this particular chapter in this book is going to address that issue. So, and then he goes on to say, well, what's really at the back of these people's mind is the idea of that God has to fit all these things and all these relationships and all these requests all before him at the same moment. We might call this overload, right? So, and the reason why people think that is because they think that God is existing in time. And our life comes to us moment by moment, so it seems logical that that would be the way with God. We take it for granted that time, past, present, and future, is the way all things really exist in nature, and the whole universe is run this way. And that God himself is moving from past to future. But then he says, well, many learned theologians don't really agree with that. You know, one of the ones I can think of right now that I read was very interesting, ancient philosopher Boethius. And he was dealing with this subject of time. I can't tell you for sure what century Boethius was. I'm guessing, I forgot, 4th, 5th, 6th century, somewhere around there. So theologians started the idea that some things really are not in time at all. And now some scientists are actually coming to the same conclusions. You know, truth is truth. And, you know, what's stated, what we're finding out more and more today, if you really tune into what's happening with scientists, is that scientists are actually converting to Christianity and becoming, or at least believing in God, because they're seeing that a lot of the scriptures, that things that they always challenged, and when the science is actually proving true. But anyway, almost certainly God is not in time. Basically, he exists outside of time, and he does not exist in a series of events, one after the other. Every moment from the beginning of the world really is present to him. He's outside of time, so he sees past, present, and future all just as an eternal now. So to give you something similar to that, then he gives a story about a woman writing a novel, and Mary laid down her work, but then the next moment there was a knock at the door. Well, for Mary, there's no interval between the time putting down the work and hearing the knock. but the first half of the sentence was written, and then there's the second half. It might be when she finally came back hours later, she continued. But as far as Mary was thinking, it was all present in that moment of time. She sees the whole. So in other words, he's kind of getting at the idea that God's got a writing like a novel. The world is like a novel. It's a endless series of events. What we're really talking about is the idea that God could foresee the future. And he had, in fact, had an idea. It's in the Old Testament. I didn't look it up because I'm just doing this on the fly, and I just thought of it. In the Old Testament, that God had a picture of you in the womb, and he had a picture of your life before you even existed. God is not in time. God is the author of time. And time had to come from somewhere, and he created it for us. He says about Mary's illustration, it's not really a perfect illustration, but you can get a glimpse of somehow of the truth behind it. Somebody writing a book, they get the whole picture, but the reality is that it has to happen sequentially. God is not hurried. He's not in that time stream of this universe, is the way that he says it. And he has attention that's really infinite, and that he can spare for any one of us, because he's everywhere. He's omnipresent. He has attention for every individual on earth in a spiritual encounter. And so you are as much alone with God as if you were the only one in the world that was tuning into him at that moment, or that he ever even created. Then he died for humanity individually, as much for you as for anyone else in the world. So God does not live in a time series at all. He restates that. It's just not dribbled away moment by moment. God is life. His life is really in himself, and he chose to create time. If you picture time as a straight line, you must picture God really as the whole page. He's everything from the beginning to the end. And he's really more than that, because he existed before the beginning of the page. He existed before you could start the line and end the line, because he's the author of the creation of the line to begin with. Before I became a Christian, he's talking about himself, C.S. Lewis, he had some objections, and he said the Christians believe that the eternal God is everywhere and keeps this whole world going. And then he says, well, they also said that he was a human being, so how can this possibly be? And how could Jesus keep who is supposedly God incarnate, keep the whole universe going while he was a baby? Interesting thought, right? And even while he was sleeping as a baby. And how could he be God who knows everything? But then at the same time, Jesus asked, who touched me? Which implies sort of that he didn't know. So there are some very interesting things about this. So Jesus took on humanity, but he put aside certain aspects of his divinity as a man, and he sort of put them on the shelf. I'm sort of adding that. While he was a baby, how could he be God at the same time and take care of all these endless list of responsibilities, and they're huge for God? So I was assuming that Christ's life as God was in time, and that his life as Jesus was a shorter period taken out of that time. So when you're really talking about Jesus, the incarnate God, you're also talking about the Word that existed before, the Son existed before Jesus became incarnate. So he always did exist outside of time with God before he took on human flesh. When he took on human flesh, Jesus, then he put some of those things on the side. But then he also took whatever he needed. Okay, miracles, for example. So you cannot fit Christ's earthly life into any time relations with his life as God that is beyond all space and time. It's really timeless truth about God. And the nature and the experiences are somehow in his divine life. His human life in God is, from our point of view, a particular period. It entails a history. But God has no history. So history entails a beginning and an end. In God there is no beginning. In the Word, which is Jesus, took on flesh, incarnate, Word incarnate. The Word is eternal from before time and past time, if time ceases. So there is no history for God. He is really, he's too completely real to have a history. He is reality. And when someone has a history, it means that they're going to die and they're going to lose that. And that's the reality. And time is slipping away from, into the past. And also, when someone has a history, there's also a future that hasn't come to them yet and they haven't experienced yet. And then we're left in this this place of this tiny little present. But, even if you get into the ancient Greek philosophers, then you're talking about, well, that doesn't even exist because a snap of a finger, it's already gone. So then you get ancient Greek philosophers who are saying, well, then nothing. Time doesn't even exist in that sense because you can't pinpoint it. So some people that say that reality doesn't exist because you can't pinpoint it because time is marching on. And it doesn't matter how far you divide it in smaller and smaller and smaller segments. It can always be divided further, smaller. And you could never pinpoint any one specific instant because you could divide that instant. So, and then he says, well, God forbid that we should ever think of God as like that he has a history like that, or that he's pinned down by time. Everyone who believes in God believes that God knows what you and I are going to do tomorrow. If he knows I'm going to do so-and-so, how can I be free to do otherwise? And he says, so now he's talking about free will versus determinism. The difficulty comes in thinking that God is progressing along the timeline. If God foresaw our acts, it would be very hard, he says, to understand that how we really could be free at all. And maybe perhaps free not to do them. But God foresaw them, that means we must have to do them. But this is the way that you're really thinking about God. But suppose that God is outside of time and he's above the timeline. He uses those words, above the timeline. All the days are really, for God, now for him. And he sees you doing them. Though you have lost yesterday, he hasn't. He just sees that you're doing them. So in other words, there isn't a history for him. You have done it, and in the past or now or in the future, he just sees it all. And then he says something which I rarely find anyone thinking this. I actually believe this, and I was kind of astounded that he said this. He does not foresee things tomorrow. That's a really interesting thing, because if you look in the Bible, it's very interesting. There are lots of places where God sort of changes his mind. Well, we have always heard that God is changes not, and they're both true. So God is who he is, and he doesn't change who he is. But it's interesting, his view about time and God and time. He says God does not foresee things tomorrow. He simply sees you doing them. Though tomorrow is not yet there for you, it is for him. okay, because he just sees you doing them. He doesn't need to pinpoint what moment in time that you do them, I guess is what he's implying. Your actions are not any less free just because God knows what you're doing. He knows your tomorrow's actions, and because he is already in tomorrow. He does not know your action till you have done it. That I found was the most interesting. That's the big question I have asked myself countless times. C.S. Lewis, I'll read these word for word. He does not know your action till you have done it. That's really my perception, or at least I wonder about God, because there's so many places in the Bible where God even changes his mind. Talking to Moses, he changes his mind. Okay. Or he's going to, Nineveh is going to destroy Nineveh with Jonah, coming to give the warning, and Jonah gives the warning, and then he changes his mind and he doesn't do it. There are a lot of examples in the Bible where God is accepting the actions of the free will of humanity. They're making decisions, and he's making decisions based on those decisions. It's as if what C.S. Lewis is saying, he does not foresee things tomorrow, or rather, where did he say it? He does not know your actions till you have done it. Then he can respond.